Each year, storms across our state cause significant damage. Due to their widespread nature, costs arising from these events can be significant. To better understand the formation, impacts, and costs of storms, we spoke to Bradley Santos from the Bureau of Meteorology and Alan Gale from the Department of Fire and Emergency Services.
The term storm is normally used to refer to a thunderstorm, but it can also refer to the passage of a cold front over southern parts of the state during the May to September period. Thunderstorms are normally associated with cumulonimbus clouds, and they typically have rainfall associated with them, and they normally only affect a small area, as opposed to a cold front which can affect large parts of southern WA. Thunderstorms are more frequent over northern parts of the state, including the Kimberley and the Pilbara, and particularly during the wet season between November and April. Thunderstorms are least likely to occur over parts of the southwest corner and also the west coast, but they can occur during the passage of cold fronts during the May to September period over southern parts of the state.
To forecast storms, meteorologists go through a number of steps.
The first and most important step for our forecasters is to gain an appreciation and understanding of the current state of the atmosphere, and they do that by looking at satellite images, radar images, and surface and upper air observations. They can then gain an understanding of the current state of the atmosphere, and after this they can move on to the next step of verifying whether our computer model data is accurately representing the state of the atmosphere or not. Our forecasters then move on to the process of a forecast policy, which describes the evolution of the weather out from a couple of hours out to about a week. When it comes to thunderstorms, our forecasters have to work quite quickly because the time from a cloud to develop through to its violent end can be between 1 and 2 hours, and so we need to identify areas where storms are possible. And again, this is done by looking at surface and upper air weather observations, and our forecasters determine where storms are likely, and if they think that severe thunderstorms are likely, that the warning will be issued. On some occasions, when we're very confident of severe thunderstorms, the warning will go out during the morning, the so-called blue sky warning, before a cloud has even developed. Other times, the warnings will be a couple of hours before the impact from those thunderstorms. When the Bureau issues a severe weather or a severe thunderstorm warning, we contact the Department of Fire and Emergency Services first because they are the hazard management agency for storm. The Bureau then notifies other agencies, which can include Western Power and the Department of Transport. We also notify ABC and 6PR Radio because they are emergency services broadcasters. Our warnings are also disseminated automatically to other state agencies and is also available on our website.
So the storm season, we see it around for about 6 months, starting from May, right into September and sometimes through into October. And that's the typical storm season in the south of the state. Our thunderstorm season tends to follow on from then as far as the rest of the state is concerned. And so we're seeing thunderstorms starting to happen inland right throughout the goldfields, up through the Gascoyne and up into the Pilbara and Kimberley regions from about October, November onwards. And associated with those thunderstorms comes certainly the heavy rain, comes the lightning, and quite often some fairly turbulent winds as well. The area of the state that suffers mainly from storms is our southern coastal area, so right along the south coast and up our west coast as you come away from Cape Leeuwin. And that's predominantly because of those big cold fronts that come across in the wintertime between May and September. By the time the winds actually cross the coast and head a little bit inland, they start to lose a lot of their intensity, and hence you don't get the wind damage, the rain starts to fall off, and so the impact is reduced. But if we get the tornadoes that are spawned from these systems, they can sometimes travel for quite a few kilometres. And even if the winds have started to drop off in some of these systems, the winds in a tornado are very intense, hundreds of kilometres per hour. So they can cause a lot of damage over a very small strip. It's not at all uncommon for tornadoes also to form with thunderstorm cells. It's quite common throughout the southwest of the state. We often refer to tornadoes as sometimes some tornado alleys, and that's because we know of tornadoes that have been through those particular areas. Tornadoes can happen pretty much anywhere in Western Australia. It's where there's people that we mostly notice them, because that's where we've got buildings that get damaged, it's where we've got people that can get hurt. that's where we've got infrastructure that can get damaged as well. So anywhere across the state, that I would certainly suggest our most common area that suffers the most would be from about Geraldton south through to Esperance, and then a line that goes down tending towards the coast and a little bit inland as you head down through the Collies and swing around towards Esperance.
By understanding historical events, we are able to gain a better understanding of future events. We asked Bradley to discuss some significant events in Western Australian history.
Thunderstorms are fairly common over WA, but particularly over Perth, they can be reasonably rare, particularly severe thunderstorms. And that's why the event on the 22nd of March 2010 really stands out. Those type of storms do occur in other parts of the state, but they do occur from time to time. But for Perth, that really was a standout event, and it has often been described as a once-in-a-generation type storm. So on that day, we saw severe thunderstorms affect Perth and the southwest from about 3:30 in the afternoon through to about 6 p.m. And those severe thunderstorms brought damage estimated at over $1 billion. That event also saw hail to 6 centimetres in diameter being recorded in Wembley, a suburb of Perth, and that's the largest hail recorded in Perth ever. So that certainly was a very significant event. The system also brought very heavy rainfall, severe wind gusts, and we saw wind gusts of 120 kilometres per hour at Ocean Reef in the metropolitan area and getting up to 128 kilometres per hour at Cunderdin Airfield to the east of Perth. Another event which stands out was a severe windstorm which battered the west coast and southwest parts on the 23rd of May 1994 through to the early hours of the 24th. A deep low pressure system produced widespread damage, mainly in coastal communities between Mandurah and Geraldton. The worst of the weather on that occasion occurred around 8 o'clock in the evening, but violent squalls continued in showers right through the night. And just to show that thunderstorms can occur at any time of year, particularly severe thunderstorms occurred on the 23rd of December 1995 through till Christmas Day 1995. On that particular time, severe thunderstorms affected southwest parts of the state, with the worst of the weather being recorded on the afternoon and evening of Christmas Eve, where we saw hailstorms with generally golf ball size hail being recorded, but in some situations in a storm near Dalwallinu, hail was estimated up to about softball size, which is incredibly large, and there was significant damage recorded through many towns over southern inland parts of the state.
Having explored some past events, we wanted to understand the impacts of storm, especially those impacts which are less well known.
As far as the impacts go that are less well known, probably the erosion that's happening to our coastline is something that's becoming very relevant now. Now it's associated with rising waters. And we're looking at buildings that are starting to get very close to the edge of waterways and threatening to start to collapse in. That's starting to happen in Western Australia. It's certainly more common in other places in the world. Also, the rising water, for example, near Riverside Drive, if we get a low pressure system hovering over Perth, we get wave action and we've got a high tide, you actually see water starting to inundate that road. Also Kwinana Freeway, you start getting wave action, bringing water onto vehicles as they're travelling past. So they're very tangible, very obvious hazards that causes major stoppages because we have to close those roads. So there are a couple of very obvious ones. Some of the less obvious that relate to our homes is water actually coming in onto roofs and all of a sudden a ceiling collapses and it might be a day or two after a storm has actually passed by. Because homeowners don't realise there's actually water sitting on their roofs, and all of a sudden you've got a ceiling that collapses in on top of your TV and your home entertainment systems and on top of your furniture. I think what we're seeing from that is that you're having things like insurance in place is a very good thing to help you to get through that. It'd be fair to say that during storms throughout the southwest in particular, the most obvious impact is that we lose power. And we talk about 250,000 residences offline and having no power. We're talking about a lot of freezers, a lot of food rotting. So then we've got the problem of getting rid of that food. We've got the costs associated with it. We've got downtime as well because people find themselves having to put time into trying to find generators, having to come home to do things from work. So there's a lot of productivity loss through that rather than the obvious losses. It could relate to business. The concern that I would have and our agency has about storm is probably that a community treats it as something that just happens all the time, and people get caught out because they do that. Now, people need to be prepared for storm. People certainly need to heed any warnings that are given out about storm, but that goes for communities as well as far as what sort of systems do you put in place to make sure that a community knows when they're likely to be impacted by a storm. I think one of the concerns for the future in regard to storm is the unknown associated with change, with climate change. So it can be a bit difficult to factor that in. What we do know with cost is the community appears to be getting much better at dealing with the impact associated with it and preparing for it. That says that the costs should reduce per head, but with a growing population, with improved building standards, and still finding most of that population is actually going to live on our coast and is going to be here in the southwest corner, the cost is not going to reduce too soon. It's going to keep climbing. It's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of planning to make sure that we stay on top of it. Otherwise, it will just get out of hand if we haven't got a community that's doing its bit. Just looking at vegetation effects alone can have quite an amazing effect on your property, on your roads, on your communication, on your power services. So just how we handle the different trees that we plant in our yards and on our streets and in our parks can make a difference. So it's up to a community to actually to do their best to prepare for these sort of events. We know the cost is going to climb. Let's keep those costs at a level that's sustainable by our community and without having to rely on bringing help in. The southwest corner of Western Australia is the southwest corner of Australia. It's the area that we know is going to be impacted by these huge winter fronts forever and a day. It's going to happen every year. You couldn't be better set for planning, really, as far as understanding your hazard goes. We have almost 200 years worth of history just on this corner to know what the effects are. So as the community grows, we need to grow with it in our planning and preparation as well. So much of it is preventable, and we're doing that through improved design and construction of our buildings and our infrastructure. It's fair to say that in the past, a lot of it's already been blown away because it wasn't done right. We are doing it right this time. We're doing it a lot better now, and the community just needs to stay on top of it, be proactive, and we'll stay resilient when it comes to storms.